May 10th, 1945. Bad Mondorf, Luxembourg. British debriefing facility. The tremor in the Major Karl Erik Kuhlenthal's hand holding the cigarette was barely perceptible as he sat opposite his British interrogator, dictating words that would forever remain etched in his memory. Excuses and carelessness are unacceptable. Were it not for my principles and conviction, I would consider this endeavor a complete personal failure. These were not Kuhlenthal's pronouncements. These were the passionate words of his most trusted operative, Juan Pujol Garcia, known by his code name Arabelle, penned in exasperation when German radio communicators failed to relay his crucial alert regarding the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944. Kuhlenthal had wholeheartedly accepted every detail, championed this agent's reliability to Berlin, and wagered his entire professional standing on the intelligence furnished by Arabelle. Now, within the confines of this interrogation chamber, he was realizing that his most celebrated intelligence coup had in reality been his most devastating miscalculation. For a span of 4 years, the former intelligence officer had managed what he believed to be Nazi Germany's most formidable espionage apparatus operating within Great Britain. 27 operatives, meticulously feeding him granular intelligence concerning Allied military preparations. The German command was so thoroughly convinced by this network's efficacy that they ceased all further efforts to recruit additional clandestine agents within the United Kingdom. What Kuhlenthal remained unaware of, what no one within German intelligence had the slightest inkling of, was that every single one of these purported agents was entirely fictitious, conceived and perpetuated by a single individual residing in a modest dwelling in Hendon, North London, secretly working for British intelligence. The sheer scale of the deception was extraordinary. Over 500 radio transmissions were exchanged between January of 1944 and the pivotal D-Day, with periods seeing as many as 20 messages transmitted daily. 315 letters, each averaging 2,000 words in length, were dispatched. No fewer than 62 of Pujol's communiques were incorporated into the intelligence summaries prepared by the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. And the ultimate consequence of this elaborate charade? 2 panzer divisions and 19 infantry divisions were strategically held in the Pas-de-Calais region, anticipating a secondary invasion throughout July and August of 1944. The unraveling had commenced long before anyone in Berlin could comprehend. By 1941, Germany's military intelligence arm, the Abwehr, confronted a profound crisis they were incapable of acknowledging, even to themselves. Between September and November of 1940, fewer than 25 agents successfully infiltrated the country, predominantly of Eastern European origin. They were poorly trained and demonstrably unmotivated. Every operative dispatched to Britain had either been apprehended, turned traitor, or executed. The once vaunted German intelligence service found itself effectively blind. In Madrid, the Abwehr's station operated from an elegant edifice on Calle Fernando el Santo, meticulously maintaining the outward appearance of diplomatic normalcy while desperately seeking any conduit for intelligence emanating from Britain. The station chief, Wilhelm Lemmer, also known as Gustav Lent, had failed to establish even a solitary dependable operative within the British Isles. His deputy, Major Karl Erik Kuhlenthal, grew increasingly disheartened. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris had taken a distinct liking to Kuhlenthal, to such an extent that Lemmer's authority was effectively diminished. Kuhlenthal was a figure of considerable complexity within Nazi intelligence. He was of mixed heritage, identified as a Mischling, a half-Jew with a Jewish maternal grandmother, yet Canaris had managed to procure an Aryan certificate for him in 1941. Perhaps this background, perpetually existing on the fringe of acceptance, a constant need to validate his own worth, made him particularly susceptible to embracing success when it seemingly materialized. The pressure from Berlin was relentless. The Wehrmacht required precise intelligence on British troop strength, their deployment patterns, national morale, and preparedness. The Luftwaffe demanded accurate targeting information. The Navy needed detailed convoy schedules, and Köhlenthal possessed nothing. Then, in January of 1941, a diminutive, unremarkable Spaniard entered the German embassy in Madrid. Juan Pujol Garcia did not present the appearance of a master spy. At 29 years of age, he was a failed poultry farmer, a moderately successful hotel manager, and a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, having managed, with no notable distinction, to serve on opposing sides. Harboring a profound antipathy towards both communist and fascist ideologies, Pujol was resolute in his desire to contribute to the global good during the Second World War. His initial attempts at espionage were almost comically inept. He approached the British authorities no less than 3 times, but they evinced no interest in recruiting him as an informant. The British embassy in Madrid, besieged daily by the propositions of Spanish opportunists, saw nothing extraordinary in this earnest, unassuming man and his stated aspiration to aid in defeating fascism. However, Pujol harbored a stratagem. If the British would not engage him as an agent, he would first assume the role of a German operative and subsequently offer his services to the British as a double agent. He approached the Abwehr office in Madrid and tendered his services to spy for Germany. Again, the Abwehr initially displayed minimal interest in his offer to work for them, but Pujol remained persistent, successfully convincing the Abwehr officials that he possessed a visa to travel to London under the guise of a Spanish diplomat. His tenacity eventually wore down Gustav Lehmer, the Abwehr recruiter. After months of repeated visits, increasingly elaborate narratives, and fervent pro-Nazi pronouncements that would have embarrassed Joseph Goebbels himself, Lehmer finally directed him to Köhlenthal. The major was skeptical but desperate. Here was a Spaniard, claiming diplomatic credentials, who asserted his ability to reach Britain. Following a brief period of instruction in clandestine techniques, Garcia was explicitly instructed not to engage in any espionage activities within England. Instead, he was tasked with recruiting operatives and was provided with a designated address in Spain where he was to dispatch his covert communications. They provided him with $3,000, the code name Arabelle, and directives to establish an intelligence network within Britain. On July 19, 1941, Pujol departed Madrid, ostensibly bound for Britain. Köhlenthal eagerly awaited the initial dispatches from his new operative in London. Pujol never set foot in Britain. Instead, he proceeded to Lisbon, Portugal, where he checked into a modest hotel and embarked on one of the most audacious deceptions in intelligence history. Utilizing the resources of the Lisbon Library, he fabricated reports drawing information from a Spanish translation of Foda's Guide to England, a tourist handbook, various magazines, reference volumes, railway timetables, maps, and newsreels. Lounging in Lisbon's cafes, poring over travel guides and vintage British newspapers, Pujol began to construct an imaginary Britain. He invented weather patterns, railway schedules, and troop movements. He developed a lexicon of British life, meticulously gleaned from guidebooks, ration books, blackout regulations, and air raid alerts. Every detail was crafted to appear authentic to Germans who had never visited Britain. His initial report to Köhlenthal was tentative, offering general observations on British morale and prevailing weather conditions. The response was encouraging. Berlin was attentive. Emboldened by this positive reception, Pujol commenced to expand his fictional world. He invented his first subagent, a Portuguese commercial traveler named Carvalho, who journeyed extensively for business and could supposedly report from diverse regions of Britain. The reports grew increasingly detailed. He described convoy movements originating from Liverpool, inaccurately placing them on a map. He reported on troop concentrations in Scotland and fabricated wholesale aircraft production figures. Each communiqué judiciously incorporated sufficient accurate information gleaned from newspapers that eventually reached Lisbon to maintain an illusion of credibility, interspersed with outright fabrications. However, Pujol made errors that should have immediately exposed him. He reported on Glasgow dockworkers, characterizing them as individuals who would do anything for a litre of wine, unaware that British beer was served in pints, not litres, and that wine was rarely consumed by dock labourers. He described train journeys from London to Glasgow taking times that would have necessitated speeds unattainable on British railways. He located British Army divisions in positions that any competent map examination would have revealed as geographically impossible. Yet, Colenthal accepted every word as fact. By the close of 1941, Pujol recognized the necessity for assistance. His elaborate deception was becoming too intricate for him to sustain single-handedly from Lisbon. He also invented a vast cadre of non-existent operatives. At its zenith, these purported agents numbered 27, including a Swiss financier in London, a Venetian dockworker in Glasgow, and a KLM pilot who plied the route between Britain and Portugal. Each fictional operative was endowed with a distinct persona, a backstory, and specific access to intelligence. The Swiss banker, designated J2, was capable of providing reports on financial matters and government policy. The Venezuelan student, J3, was ideally positioned at a Scottish military installation. An unnamed Gibraltarian waiter, J4, was employed in canteens where officers frequently conversed openly. To account for the transmission of his reports to Lisbon, Pujol conceived of an airline employee who purportedly carried them on the London-Lisbon route, thereby explaining the Portuguese postmarks and any delays in their arrival. When the Germans subsequently demanded more rapid communication following Operation Torch, Pujol and Harris devised a fictitious radio operator. Meanwhile, in London, British intelligence began to register the presence of a mysterious German operative. Through ultra-intercepts, the highly classified program that had successfully deciphered the German Enigma code, they were able to read Abwehr communications. They repeatedly encountered references to an agent codenamed Arabelle, who was purportedly operating within Britain, transmitting intelligence that was demonstrably inaccurate, yet was being accepted at face value by the Germans. MI5 found this situation deeply alarming. Who was this agent? How had they managed to elude their comprehensive surveillance network? Each report was meticulously analyzed, and every assertion subjected to rigorous verification. The answer appeared to be entirely implausible. The agent did not exist within Britain at all. By February 1942, MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service, had become aware of Garbo, even though he was not yet officially affiliated with their organization. They learned of Garbo's activities through ultra-decrypts of German radio messages that had been encoded using Enigma machines. The British were intercepting German intelligence reports pertaining to their own nation, reports that were entirely fabricated, yet were being accepted as absolute truth by the Germans. In Lisbon, Pujol was growing increasingly desperate. His carefully constructed deception was becoming untenable. He required assistance from the British, but his prior attempts to engage them had been rebuffed. Finally, in February 1942, he initiated contact with the American naval attaché in Lisbon, Lieutenant Patrick de Merrimest. This time, by presenting evidence of his ongoing correspondence with the Germans, Pujol was taken seriously. Following a contentious dispute among the various British intelligence agencies regarding the appropriate course of action concerning Garcia, he was eventually covertly transported out of Lisbon via a vessel bound for Gibraltar. Once safely established in Gibraltar, he was dispatched to England. He disembarked in Plymouth on April 24, 1942. Awaiting him at the docks were two individuals, Sir Kellen Mills and Thomas Harris of MI5. Harris, himself of partial Spanish heritage and fluent in the language, would become Pujol's handler and the co-architect of what would prove to be the most significant deception in military history. Mills proposed that Pujol's codename be altered to reflect his status as the world's greatest actor, and thus Pujol became Garbo, in homage to the renowned actress Greta Garbo. The British were astonished by the accomplishments Pujol had achieved operating independently. Working from Lisbon with only guidebooks and newspapers, He had successfully conjured an entire intelligence network that German intelligence believed implicitly. Now, with the considerable resources of MI5 at his disposal, the deception could be amplified to an unprecedented degree. The unassuming two-story residence at 35 Crespigny Road in Hendon, North London, transformed into the operational hub of one of the war's most pivotal clandestine undertakings. This unassuming 1920s suburban house became both Pujol's residence and his clandestine workplace. Here, Pujol and Harris would dedicate countless hours to meticulously crafting the fictional narratives that would ultimately contribute to saving thousands of Allied lives. Daily, Pujol and Harris convened to compose messages intended for the Germans. Each communication was painstakingly designed to maintain the distinct voice and established persona of whichever fictional subagent was purportedly submitting the report. The Swiss banker's communications were characterized by formal, cautious prose. The Venezuelan student's dispatches were enthusiastic yet naive. The communist sailor's messages conveyed bitterness towards capitalism but demonstrated unwavering loyalty to his paymaster. Harris soon developed a convincing identity for Garbo, providing the Germans with both inconsequential tidbits of information and a substantial volume of carefully constructed deception. Genuine military intelligence, judiciously selected to be either innocuous or arriving too late to exert any practical influence, was interwoven with crucial fabrications. The art lay in achieving a delicate equilibrium. An excess of fabricated information could arouse German suspicion, while the inclusion of too much accurate intelligence risked inflicting actual harm. The network continued its expansion. When Pujol needed to explain the absence of reports concerning ship movements from Liverpool, he simply declared his agent in that location deceased. To substantiate this fabrication, the British fabricated an obituary for the non-existent spy, which they subsequently published in the local newspaper. By early 1943, Garbo's network had evolved into such a complex entity that organizational charts were necessitated to meticulously track the fictional operatives. Each possessed their own intricate subplot, their own purported access to information, and their own unique personality quirks. Some allegedly fell in love, others feigned illness, some demanded increased remuneration, and others proved disappointingly unreliable. All of it was pure fiction, and all of it was believed. In Madrid, Karl Erich Kuhlenthal had become utterly reliant on the Arabelle network. The intelligence provided was so abundant, so detailed, and so seemingly trustworthy that he ceased all attempts to recruit new agents in Britain. Why jeopardize new infiltrations when Arabelle was supplying all that Berlin required? When Canaris, the Abwehr chief, visited Spain, Kuhlenthal was the star attraction. He proudly showcased his agent network, highlighting particularly astute pieces of intelligence. In March 1943, Garbo had even sent them a cake with an RAF handbook concealed within, the chocolate icing bearing the inscription, "With good wishes to Odette." Canaris was reportedly delighted by such ingenuity. The Germans compensated handsomely for this intelligence. By 1943, they were financing all 27 of Garbo's fictional operatives, transmitting thousands of dollars through various financial channels. This money, meticulously accounted for by MI5, flowed directly into British government coffers. The Germans were, in essence, funding their own elaborate deception. However, Kuhlenthal was not merely relaying Garbo's intelligence, he was embellishing it. Many of his additions were either inaccurate or inconsequential. He also made some remarkably erroneous blunders, including his steadfast belief that the Isle of Man was situated in the north of Ireland. His fervent desire to please Berlin compelled him to append details that Garbo had never supplied, thereby constructing an even more intricate fictional edifice. The relationship between handler and operative had evolved into a state of near symbiosis. Kuhlenthal required Arabelle to preserve his position and his reputation. Garbo astutely exploited this dependency. "The more we dictated our terms," Pujol later observed, "the more they cooperated. The more arrogant and temperamental Garbo became, the more accommodating they were in return. By January of 1944, the stakes had escalated to an existential level. The Germans informed Puyol that they believed the Allies were preparing for a large-scale invasion of Europe and that they relied on him to keep them apprised of all developments. Everything that Garbo and Harris had painstakingly constructed over 3 years was now about to face its ultimate test. The deception plan, codenamed Operation Fortitude, was breathtaking in its sheer audacity and scope. The Allies needed to convince the Germans that the invasion would materialize at the Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point from England to France, rather than at Normandy, where it would actually occur. Furthermore, even after the landings in Normandy commenced, the Germans had to be convinced that these were merely a diversionary tactic. The skeletal framework of the new force already existed in the form of the 1st United States Army Group, FUS, nominally commanded by Omar Bradley. It had initially been formed for administrative purposes and had never been deployed. However, the Germans had discovered its existence through radio intercepts. Now, it would be transformed into a phantom army of 150,000 men under the command of General George Patton. Garbo's network intensified its operations. Between January of 1944 and D-Day, over 500 radio messages, averaging 4 transmissions daily, were exchanged between Garbo and Madrid, which in turn retransmitted them directly to Berlin. Each message added another layer to the overarching deception. Troop movements, stockpiling of supplies, and training exercises all meticulously pointed towards the Pas de Calais. Agent 3, the Venezuelan operative, reported extensive military preparations occurring in Scotland. Agent 7, a Welsh fisherman, described significant shipping concentrations in Dover. Agent 43, an American sergeant, detailed Patton's presence in southeastern England. Each report served to reinforce the fabricated narrative. The 1st United States Army Group was a tangible entity, vast in scale, and purportedly aimed at the Pas de Calais. As D-Day loomed, Garbo and Harris confronted an almost insurmountable challenge. To maintain their credibility, Garbo had to issue a warning to the Germans about the impending invasion, but crucially, not early enough for them to mount an effective response. The timing was paramount. Special arrangements were made with the German radio operators to be on alert for Garbo's transmissions throughout the night of June 5, 1944, employing the ruse that a subagent was about to arrive with critical information. However, when the transmission was made at 3 o'clock in the morning, no response was received from the German operators until 8 o'clock in the morning. This failure by the Germans to respond promptly became a masterstroke of the deception. When contact was finally established, hours after Allied paratroopers had commenced their landings, Garbo transmitted accurate information regarding the invasion, but it was by then tragically too late to be of any practical use. Then came his outburst of fury at being ignored. "I cannot accept excuses or negligence. Were it not for my principles, I would abandon this undertaking." The Germans were mortified. Their most valuable operative had risked everything to provide them with a warning, and they had failed to heed it. Kolenthal dispatched deeply apologetic messages to his prized agent, but the truly significant deception was yet to unfold. 3 days following the Normandy landings, with Allied forces struggling valiantly to secure their beachhead against fierce German resistance, Garbo dispatched the most critical message of the entire war. It was lengthy, exceptionally detailed, and conveyed a sense of extreme urgency, demanding immediate transmission to the highest echelons of German command. The message, meticulously crafted by Garbo and Harris over many intense hours, reported that the Normandy landings were merely a feint. The true invasion, spearheaded by Patton's 1st Army Group, would target the Pas de Calais. Garbo's purported agents scattered throughout Britain corroborated this claim. The forces that had landed in Normandy were, in reality, secondary. The main army remained poised in southeastern England, awaiting further orders. A German communiqué to Madrid, sent 2 days later, stated, All reports received in the past week from Arabelle, code name for the spy network, have been confirmed without exception and are to be described as exceptionally valuable. This message was directed straight to the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel reviewed it. Colonel General Alfred Jodl analyzed it. It ultimately reached Hitler himself at his headquarters in the Wolf's Lair. The German response was immediate and decisive. The 15th Army, stationed in the Pas-de-Calais, comprising over 200,000 men, was ordered to maintain its position. The 1st SS Panzer Division, already en route to Normandy, was commanded to halt. The 11th Panzer Division remained in reserve north of the Seine River. The OKW accepted Garbeau's report with such complete conviction that they kept 2 armored divisions and 19 infantry divisions in the Pas-de-Calais region, anticipating a secondary invasion throughout July and August of 1944. At the Wehrmacht headquarters, the intelligence originating from Agent Arabelle was treated as irrefutable gospel. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, had argued for the transfer of the 15th Army to Normandy as early as June 8th. Hitler, influenced by Garbeau's reports, refused. The Phantom Army, positioned in southeastern England, could not be disregarded. Such was the profound success of fortitude that numerous German units were retained far from the Normandy battlefield until well into July. Week after week, as Allied forces consolidated their bridgehead, expanded their perimeter, and prepared for a decisive breakout, German troops continued to wait in the Pas-de-Calais for an invasion that would never materialize. The German intelligence services had been utterly deceived regarding the true strength of the Allied forces. They believed the Allies possessed 89 divisions in Britain, when in reality the number was 47. They were convinced that Patton commanded a colossal army group, when he was, in fact, in disgrace and awaiting a genuine command. They believed Norway was under threat from a British Fourth Army supposedly stationed in Scotland, an entity that existed solely within Garbeau's meticulously crafted messages. Even after the Allies broke out from Normandy in late July, even as they surged across France in August, certain German commanders still harbored the belief that the primary invasion had not yet commenced. Garbeau's reports had engendered a state of strategic paralysis that persisted for months beyond D-Day. On July 29, 1944, as Allied armies advanced across France with great momentum, a remarkable message arrived from Germany. He received word that the Führer himself had bestowed upon him the Iron Cross for his exceptional contributions to Germany. In a prompt reply, Pujol and Harris conveyed Garau's profound gratitude for such an esteemed recognition, humbly stating he felt undeserving. The situation was deeply ironic. Hitler had personally presented Germany's most distinguished military honor to a British double agent, someone who had played a crucial role in the Third Reich's ultimate downfall. In that same year, King George V would secretly award Pujol the Member of the Order of the British Empire, or MBE, for the very same actions. He thus became one of the few individuals to receive high accolades from opposing sides during the conflict. The bestowal of the Iron Cross signified the complete and utter trust the Germans placed in Garbeau. Even as their military forces were in retreat, and even as the evidence of his betrayal should have become glaringly obvious, they never once suspected that their most valued operative was, in fact, their most formidable adversary. By September of 1944, with Allied forces closing in on the German frontier, MI5 found itself confronting a precarious dilemma. Following a near miss, where it was feared Pujol might be exposed as a British operative, the decision was made for him to vanish from sight. Although his elaborate network continued to feed the Germans misleading intelligence, the pretense was maintained that Garbeau had been forced to abscond, fearing apprehension by British authorities who were reportedly closing in on his operations. Nevertheless, his subordinate operatives persisted in sending reports, perpetuating the deception even as the Third Reich began to unravel. Some agents fabricated reports concerning non-existent communist infiltration within the Allied ranks. Others fabricated accounts of imaginary friction between American and British military contingents. The Germans remained entirely credulous. Even as Berlin fell and the Wehrmacht capitulated, German intelligence archives indicated they still regarded the Garbo network as their most dependable conduit for information originating from Britain. This brings us back to that tense interrogation room in Luxembourg. In May of 1945, Major Karl Erik Clendenin sat opposite British intelligence officers who were meticulously, systematically unraveling the truth behind Agent Arabelle. The British interrogator presented document after document. Here were Garau's dispatches. Here were the corresponding German replies. Here were the deployment orders that held entire divisions in reserve. Here were the intelligence summaries that reached Hitler's desk. And here was the stark reality. Every single operative within the network was entirely fictitious. Clendenin's world imploded. For 4 years, he had gambled his reputation, his career, his very life on Agent Arabelle. He had championed him against doubters, had argued for the necessary resources to sustain the network, and had even boasted to Canaris himself about his unparalleled intelligence triumph. Clendenin's reports had been exceptionally well received in Berlin. However, from a British perspective, Clendenin's susceptibility to deception rendered him worse than useless. The interrogator presented him with a photograph, a small, unremarkable Spanish man with a faint smile. Juan Pujol Garcia, the failed chicken farmer who had approached the German embassy in Madrid 4 years prior. The man who, operating from a suburban residence in North London, had engineered an intelligence apparatus so utterly convincing that the German High Command had based its strategic planning upon it. 27 agents, the interrogator stated, all figments of imagination, all remunerated by German intelligence, all conceived by one man and his British handler. Clendenin offered no response. There was nothing to be said. The numbers, when finally tallied, were astonishing. The Garbo network had transmitted over 500 radio messages in the critical months leading up to D-Day. The Germans had disbursed approximately $340,000 in 1940s currency to finance these fabricated agents. The elaborate deception had effectively kept over 500,000 German soldiers away from Normandy during the crucial weeks following D-Day. Military historians would later calculate that Operation Fortitude, with Garbo at its very core, had truncated the war in Europe by several months, perhaps even a full year. The divisions that were held back from Normandy could have transformed the battle into a horrific slaughter. Their absence permitted the Allies to establish, reinforce, and subsequently break out from their beachhead. However, the impact extended far beyond mere military figures. The German intelligence services never truly recovered from the profound psychological blow. If their most trusted and prolific network had been entirely fabricated, what other deceptions had they unwittingly fallen prey to? What other falsehoods had they swallowed whole? At the Nuremberg trials, German generals would cite this intelligence failure as a pivotal factor in their defeat. They had been intellectually outmatched, strategically outmaneuvered, and thoroughly deceived by an adversary they had profoundly underestimated. Field Marshal Keitel, when questioned about the failure to reinforce Normandy, could only refer to the intelligence suggesting Calais was the true objective. For years following the war, the secret was meticulously guarded. The intricate methodologies of the double-cross system, the sophisticated techniques of strategic deception, and the identities of the agents involved all remained classified. German intelligence officers passed away, never fully comprehending the immense scale of the deception they had endured. Clendenin himself returned to Germany after his debriefing and lived a quiet existence until his passing on October 25, 1975. Whether he ever fully accepted that his entire wartime endeavor had been a British fabrication remains a matter of conjecture. Some who knew him maintained that he continued to insist Arabelle must have possessed some genuine operatives, that the entire network could not possibly have been invented. Juan Pujol Garcia vanished after the war. With the assistance of MI5, Pujol relocated to Angola and orchestrated a staged death from malaria in 1949. He then moved to La Guaira, Venezuela, where he lived in considerable obscurity, managing a bookstore and gift shop. For 36 years, he existed in anonymity. His own children were unaware of their father's true history. It was not until 1984 that historian Robert Allison, writing under the pseudonym Nigel West, finally located Garbo in Venezuela. The revelation sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. The most celebrated double agent of the Second World War was still alive, operating a gift shop in Caracas. In 1984, at the age of 72, Juan Pujol Garcia returned to London for the first time since the war. At Buckingham Palace, during a private ceremony, the Duke of Edinburgh expressed his gratitude on behalf of the entire nation. D-Day veterans, learning for the first time about the deception that had preserved the lives of so many, queued to extend their hands in congratulation. He visited 35 Crescent Road, a property now occupied by a family who had no inkling that their modest dwelling had been the nerve center of one of the war's most critical operations. He met with surviving members of MI5, intelligence officers who had meticulously studied his case for decades without ever knowing if he was still alive. But perhaps the most poignant moment occurred when he was shown German intelligence files from the war years. Page after page of reports, analyses, and commendations, all predicated on his fabricated narratives. Payment receipts for operatives who had never existed. Operational directives based on his deceptions. The entire framework of German intelligence failure preserved in meticulous German documentation. "Did they truly believe it all?" Pujol inquired of his former handler. "Every word," came the reply. "They believed every word." Military historians continue to study the Garbo deception as arguably the most successful single intelligence operation of the Second World War. How did one individual, with the support of his handler, manage to deceive an entire intelligence apparatus? How did fictitious operatives become more trusted than genuine ones? The answer, in part, resided in German psychology. The Nazi regime, built upon a foundation of propaganda and self-delusion, was remarkably susceptible to accepting what it wished to believe. The Germans anticipated having spies within Britain. Consequently, when Garbo emerged, they readily accepted him. They anticipated an Allied invasion at Calais. Therefore, when Garbo corroborated this expectation, they believed him. However, the more profound explanation lay in the sheer artistry of the deception. Garbo and Harris did not merely transmit information, they meticulously constructed an entire world. Each operative possessed a distinct personality, motivations, strengths, and vulnerabilities. The network experienced internal conflicts, clandestine romantic liaisons, and financial perditiones, all the messy human elements that lent it an air of undeniable reality. Following the war, former Abwehr operatives explained that submitting numerous false reports was preferable to submitting few or none at all. The alternative was reassignment to the front lines. This pressure to generate intelligence, irrespective of its veracity, fostered a system where quantity was prioritized over verification, and impressive reports held more weight than accurate ones. Behind the stark statistics and the strategic ramifications lay poignant human stories. Every German division held at Calais represented Allied soldiers who lived rather than perished on the beaches of Normandy. Every day the Germans waited for the purported invasion meant another day for Allied forces to consolidate their positions. Estimates suggest that Operation Fortitude saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. Soldiers who stormed Omaha Beach, who fought their way through the hedgerows of Normandy, who achieved the breakout in Operation Cobra, many owed their survival to a Spanish double agent they never knew existed. On the German side, the cost was catastrophic. Divisions that could have repelled the Allies back into the sea remained idle, awaiting phantom armies. Young German soldiers perished in Normandy, while reinforcements were held at Calais, anticipating an invasion that never materialized. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who commanded the Atlantic defenses, argued strenuously for redeploying forces to Normandy during the critical days following June 6th. Overruled by Hitler based on intelligence received from Agent Arabelle, He witnessed his outnumbered forces being systematically worn down. The Desert Fox, Germany's most lauded commander, was ultimately vanquished not by Allied tanks, but by fabricated intelligence originating from a Barcelona chicken farmer. Perhaps the most profound irony of the Garbo narrative lies in how narrowly it escaped never happening at all. On 3 separate occasions, Pujol had approached the British and been rebuffed. Had British intelligence been even slightly more receptive in 1941, had they accepted his offer immediately, the deception might never have achieved its unique character. It was precisely because Pujol was compelled to construct his network independently from Lisbon, relying solely on tourist guides and his own ingenuity, that it developed such distinctive authenticity. The errors he made, such as misplacing ships in incorrect ports or exhibiting a slight misunderstanding of British culture, paradoxically rendered the intelligence more believable to Germans who expected foreign operatives to make such gaffes. The very implausibility of the network became its greatest strength. Who would have conceived that 27 agents were all fictitious? Who would have believed that Germany's most prolific intelligence network was managed by a single individual operating from suburban London? The deception was so audacious that to suspect it would have required an imaginative leap, a feat the German intelligence services proved incapable of undertaking. When the complete saga of Garbo was finally brought to light in the 1970s and 80s, it sent seismic tremors through intelligence communities across the globe. The double-cross system, of which Garbo was the undisputed pinnacle, had successfully turned every German agent operating within Britain. Following the war, it was discovered that all agents dispatched by Germany to Britain had either surrendered or been apprehended. For surviving German intelligence officers, this revelation was devastating. They were compelled to reassess every intelligence evaluation they had ever made, every operational decision based on agent reports. The very bedrock of their wartime intelligence endeavors had been not merely flawed, but entirely illusory. One former Abwehr officer, interviewed in the 1980s, simply could not reconcile the truth. There must have been some real agents, he insisted. Arabelle couldn't have invented everything. The details were too precise, too accurate. Upon being presented with the evidence, Garau's handwritten messages, the MI5 files, the payment records, he fell silent, then quietly remarked, "Then we never stood a chance." Even after Germany's surrender, the Garbo network transmitted one final series of messages. These reached Madrid amidst the chaos of May 1945, with Nazi Germany on the verge of collapse and Clendenin himself poised for arrest. The messages warned of communist infiltration within the Allied armies, of clandestine Soviet agreements, and of tensions that would ultimately define the post-war world. They were, like everything else emanating from Garbo, meticulously crafted fabrications designed to serve British interests. However, unlike the wartime dispatches, these would never be acted upon. The Third Reich was extinguished, its intelligence services utterly shattered, its officers facing interrogation and prosecution. The final message from the Garbo network bore the date May 5, 1945. 3 days prior to Germany's capitulation. It reported that Agent 3, the non-existent Venezuelan student, had been apprehended by British counterintelligence. It was a fitting conclusion to the elaborate fiction, a fabricated arrest of a fictitious operative reported to an intelligence service that would cease to exist within mere days. Juan Pujol Garcia passed away on October 10, 1988, in Caracas, Venezuela. He was 76 years old. His death garnered international newspaper coverage. The chicken farmer who outwitted Hitler, the spy who secured D-Day, the man who conjured an army of phantoms. Yet his legacy endured in ways both tangible and intangible. The innovative techniques he pioneered in constructing intricate, believable fictional networks became standard practice within intelligence agencies worldwide. The principle he so effectively demonstrated, that in the realm of intelligence, perception could wield more power than reality, influenced Cold War operations for decades. At the D-Day Museum in Portsmouth, a modest exhibit recounts the story of Agent Garau. Visitors, many of them descendants of D-Day veterans, learn for the first time about the Spanish double agent who contributed to the survival of their forefathers. The exhibit features one of Garau's encrypted messages, its unassuming text concealing the profound deception that irrevocably altered the course of history. Back in that interrogation chamber in Luxembourg, in May of 1945, the British officer concluded his presentation of the Garbo deception's evidence to Karl-Erich Clendenin. The German intelligence officer had remained silent for nearly an hour, absorbing the immense gravity of his failure. Finally, Clendenin posed a single question. The June 9th message, the one stating Normandy was a diversion, did that originate from London? From a residence in Hendon, the interrogator confirmed. Authored by Garbo and his handler over a 6-hour period. Transmitted by radio to Madrid, retransmitted by you to Berlin. It reached Hitler himself. Clendenin nodded slowly. Then we lost the war on June 9th, 1944. The interrogator gently corrected him. You lost the war the very day you believed Agent Arabelle was real. The comprehensive accounting of the Garbo operation reveals its staggering magnitude. 27 entirely fictitious agents were conceived and sustained. Over 500 radio messages were dispatched between January and June of 1944. 315 letters, averaging 2,000 words each, were sent throughout the war. $340,000 were disbursed by German intelligence to finance non-existent operatives. 62 Garbo reports were incorporated into the Wehrmacht High Command's intelligence summaries. The German 15th Army, comprising multiple divisions, was held at Calais subsequent to D-Day. Panzer reserves were withheld from Normandy during critical junctures. A delay of 7 weeks elapsed before German High Command acknowledged Normandy as the principal invasion point. The mathematics of deception had engendered a strategic paralysis that enabled the Allies to secure their foothold in Europe. Every fabricated agent report, every invented troop movement, every conjured conversation contributed to a deception so comprehensive that it irrevocably altered the course of history. Even today, certain facets of the Garbo operation remain shrouded in mystery. How did Clendenin, described by his contemporaries as intelligent and capable, never suspect the deception? How did German intelligence, renowned for its meticulousness, never verify a single one of Garau's operatives? Part of the explanation lies in the inherent corruption of the intelligence process itself. According to one intercepted message, Clendenin was reportedly maintaining a highly costly operative in London, a Yugoslav diplomat who had cost the Abwehr £400 over a 2-year span. There were officers in Spain who were convinced that Clendenin was engaging in corrupt practices, essentially splitting the monthly allowances between his own and the diplomat's pockets. The system rewarded those who produced intelligence, not those who rigorously verified it. Clendenin's career depended on Arabelle being a genuine asset, thus he never scrutinized inconsistencies too closely. Berlin required intelligence from Britain, and therefore they never questioned their sole dependable source. The deception triumphed because every individual involved had vested reasons to believe it. The success of Agent Garbo represented a perfect confluence of factors that might never align again. A volunteer double agent possessing exceptional imagination. A handler, Thomas Harris, equipped with the cultural insight and linguistic proficiency to amplify the deception. An enemy intelligence service desperately seeking information and predisposed to embrace it. Technology, specifically Ultra, which permitted the deceivers to monitor the deception's efficacy in real time. And a strategic deception, Operation Fortitude, that necessitated precisely the kind of detailed, credible intelligence that Garbo was adept at providing. The removal of any one of these elements could have led to the failure of the entire deception. Had Pujol not been so persistent, had Harris not been available as his handler, had the Germans not been so voracious for British intelligence, had Ultra not furnished feedback on the deception's success, any of these alterations could have unraveled the entire operation. In 1984, at a reunion dinner in London with surviving MI5 officers, Juan Pujol Garcia was asked what compelled him to undertake such a perilous deception. His response was both simple and profound. "I wanted to do something good for humanity." The Nazis were evil. I had witnessed enough in Spain to recognize that. If my imagination, my ability to craft narratives, could contribute to their defeat, then that was my contribution. I possessed no firearm, no explosives, no army, but I had the capacity to make the Germans believe whatever I conveyed. That was my weapon. He paused, then added with a slight smile, "And it worked, didn't it? They believed every word." Indeed they had. For 4 critical years, German intelligence had based its assessments on the reports submitted by Agent Arabelle and his network. They had repositioned divisions based on his intelligence, allocated resources according to his warnings, and made strategic decisions informed by his fabrications. The Germans never apprehended that their most trusted window into British intentions was, in fact, a mirror, reflecting back their own preconceptions and anxieties, meticulously crafted by a former chicken farmer and the son of a Spanish-speaking art dealer working from a modest London residence. They never realized that the invasion warnings they heeded originated from fictitious agents who existed solely within the fertile imagination of Juan Pujol Garcia. They never grasped that their supposed intelligence triumph was, in reality, their most profound intelligence catastrophe. They never understood that Agent Garau had played a pivotal role in ensuring their defeat from the very moment he had first approached their embassy in Madrid. The saga of Agent Garbo remains the ultimate testament to how, in both intelligence and warfare, perception can exert a more potent influence than reality. The Germans were not defeated due to a lack of intelligence, but rather because they placed their complete trust in the wrong intelligence. They were vanquished not by armies or weaponry, but by sheer imagination and a scale of deception they had never conceived as possible. When Karl Erich Clendenin departed that interrogation room in Luxembourg, he carried with him the crushing realization that everything he had believed, every report he had relayed to Berlin, and every ounce of his reputation he had staked had been founded on an elaborate falsehood. The network he had so proudly boasted about to Canaris, the operatives he had so generously funded, the intelligence he had so vehemently defended, none of it had ever been real. Somewhere in Venezuela, Juan Pujol Garcia continued to operate his gift shop, unknown to his patrons, his neighbors, even his own children. The man who had irrevocably altered history through his imagination lived a life of quiet anonymity, guarding the secret of how a single individual's creativity had vanquished the formidable German intelligence service and played a crucial role in safeguarding Western civilization. The Germans remained oblivious, and by the time they finally learned the truth, it was tragically too late. The war had concluded. The Reich was in ruins, and Agent Garbo had cemented his place in history as perhaps the most accomplished double agent who had ever lived. The spy who secured victory on D-Day with nothing more than his ingenuity, unwavering determination, and the Germans' inherent willingness to believe what they desperately wished to be true.